Welcome to the Voices of Young People podcast, brought to you by Springtide Research Institute. In each episode, we hear directly from young people as they respond to our research and share about the issues impacting their lives. As sociologists and researchers, we see a new story unfolding for young people, one that moves beyond traditional institutional boundaries and requires careful attention to the inner and outer lives of emerging generations. At the intersection of being and becoming, it's the Voices of Young People.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marta Abawaji. I'm the head of community engagement at Springtide Research Institute, and it is my honor to host season 4 of the Voices of Young People podcast as we are digging into the research through specific conversations that coincide with our latest research report. It's a book called Work Life. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on our website, springtideresearch.org. But these conversations are here to illuminate a specific young person's experience within a specific field. And today we're talking with Avthar. You're going to love this conversation. I got a ton from it. He's a tech entrepreneur, but even if that's not your own industry, there's so many principles that he brings about that I know you will find resonance with as well. But after that conversation, we're still going to have a tip coming at you from our own executive director, Dr. Josh Packard. So be sure to listen in after the conversation with Avthar to get that info as well.
Hey everyone, my name is Avthar Siratan. I'm 25 years old. I'm originally from South Africa, but currently live in New York City in the United States. I'm a technology entrepreneur. I work in technology as a developer advocate. What that means is that I help software developers learn and use, my case, using database and data-related tools. On the side, I also write a weekly newsletter and host Learn with Avthar, which is a podcast about learning and mastery. And as a hobby, I love football. And my favorite team is Manchester United, which is the shirt I'm wearing today.
Yes, Man U, a Man U fan on the call. Avthar, it's so fun to talk to you because you are super legit. Like the credentials you have make me think, oh man, should Avthar be interviewing me on the podcast? I'm so glad you already dropped the details for your own podcast that you're hosting and bringing on guests and new conversations in your free time. But all of your tech work, all of your entrepreneurial work, I would love to dig into that more with you today. I think you're the only guest on this season who is squarely in that technology niche. Other people might have some overlaps with that, but it's such a growing field, it's such a demanding field, and you've really made a way for yourself already in New York. So kudos on all the things you've already done. I love that I can go to avthar.com to learn more about you and some of your work. That's just how legit you are, as I said before. So you're working from home, I know. And I think you told me that you were doing remote work even before the pandemic. So your ideal workplace setting, I'd love for you to think about that even beyond, the confines of your New York apartment, to think about it. What makes an ideal workplace setting in terms of maybe the setting is a virtual setting in terms of colleagues and managers and people you still collaborate with. Or maybe you're still thinking of a physical place, but what would be the actual characteristics that would make a workplace setting really ideal for you?
I think that's it's a question now that we are in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. A few years ago, remote work was this thing that not many people were familiar with. But now that a lot of people are working from home or can't go into the office, I would say that my ideal work environment in terms of like the space is going to be, semi-remote is how I would characterize it, where there is an element of independence and freedom that allows you to do your best work wherever you do it, wherever in the world you are. as long as you can meet the requirements and the expectations of you, so that you're not forced to go into an office 9 to 5 just to look like you're busy, even though you're not busy. So I think the more we can move away from kind of signaling that like I'm busy and I'm doing stuff towards like actually doing stuff. And maybe that means, sometimes working for 5 hours and getting a lot done, and other days, working for a longer than that and, not necessarily being the most productive. That's okay. I also think in an ideal work environment for me, especially work from home, is having separate spaces for work and play. That's been one of the challenges for me during the pandemic. As humans, we associate spaces with specific things. And when you start to work, play, relax, get stressed all in the same area, it can really mess with your mind. And so I actually really miss going into the office. So my ideal work situation would be, work remote, let's say maybe 3 days a week, going to the office twice a week, or, if I had to design my own company, my company in the future might be, work remote for a period of time and then have like a month or two where people are all together, if possible, or a week where everyone is together, where, we're getting to know each other in person, and then going back and doing our own thing and then coming back periodically. I also think in terms of like characteristics, I often think about like, what does it feel like to work at that place? And I know we're going to chat a little bit about this in future questions, but being in a place where people make you feel like your work is important, where you feel like you're contributing and you're not just, rolling the boulder up the hill like Sisyphus, and being in a place where there's other top performers who can bring out the best in you, where everyone is using their strengths and on that journey to mastery. I think that's very important for me to know that, like, you're all in the same boat. There's no one that's, you're in a place where you can learn from other people, but also the fact that like everyone is on that journey to trying to do their best work. And, there's not people that are just like kind of slacking around and other people that are working too hard. You're all kind of pushing in the same direction.
Yeah. So strong collaboration in that last point, and with people who maybe share similar goals and drive. But what I heard from your first point is that you really want to have that balance of independence and still feeling like you're a part of the team, in terms of like the face-to-face interaction that maybe you would still ideally get a few days a week, with being semi-remote a few days from home. So honestly, as you describe that, I'm like, that sounds like an ideal scenario. And once we get on the other side of this pandemic, I myself would love some sort of combination of the two, the best of both worlds, maybe. I think when people first started in the pandemic and so many positions transitioned to working from home, people were like, this is awesome. And then a few months in, people were like, oh my gosh, I really miss my workplace. I never thought I'd say that. I really miss my colleagues, and I miss that water cooler talk that's different than, doing it in Slack or Microsoft Teams or some sort of online chat platform. I miss that human interaction. So to have a combination of both sounds super ideal. So I'm really digging what you're explaining. And I think a lot of companies have learned a lot from this season. They've learned that their employees often can do their job from home and don't need the physical office. Whereas before, I think they didn't have the imagination to see their team being remote based. But also, I hope they're learning ways that maybe the human spirit needs a little bit of both from what you're describing. So
exactly.
Yeah, our study really digs into this work-life balance idea, and you already said that a little bit, that you need time for leisure and play, as well as time for concentrated work. So yeah, I'd love to get more into that in our conversation as well. We've been studying this theme a lot over the course of the last year in quantitative research and qualitative research, and these conversations allow us to give a specific vignette on how one young person might be relating to the research. But a key theme that we dug into is that young people, Gen Z, are really looking for work that aligns with a sense of purpose in life, where they're finding meaning in their career. What sort of expectations do you have for finding meaning within your own work?
I think this is probably one of the most important questions of our time as young people. I think my parents' generation, who grew up in South Africa during apartheid, their struggle was all about survival. Whereas, myself, I was born the year after apartheid ended in South Africa. And my struggle is all about actualization, to say, now that my parents' generation have struggled, obviously there's still problems that need to be solved, and work that needs to be done. But we're in a situation where, we're not necessarily just trying to get by, but it's all about trying to live the most fulfilling life possible. And we have this abundance of choice that's actually a paradox of choice, because there's so many things that you can do. It's all about, how do you make the most of that? And so I think when it comes to meaning, you get to create your own meaning in life. You have to do the hard thinking yourself about, like, what is the purpose for why you're doing something. I don't think there's any one size fits all answer. And I think you're going to spend a lot of time working on your work or working on your career. So you might as well not postpone your satisfaction to it. So I think it's natural to look for work to give you some sort of meaning in life. But I think you need to make that a conscious decision. Too often, I think people go into a job looking for it to fulfill them. And then once they ascend the ranks of, getting a promotion or whatever, they find that, they're still not fulfilled, even though their company or their position, they might be doing very well in it. And so I think ultimately you need to figure out, like, what does a good life look like to you? And what is the role of work in that life? Like, what is that? And make that very clear for yourself. And I think for me, I tend to think about these questions quite a lot. And for me, I think, like, my overall goal in life is to live a peaceful life of contribution. And I think my work falls into the contribution part, where it's like, how can I use my strengths and the things that I'm uniquely good at in order to help people, in order to build things that make life better to people, in order to contribute to society, whether it's through business and technology, or whether it's through education and teaching and things like that. That's the way that I look at it. And work for me is about pursuing opportunities that allow me to fulfill that purpose and to fulfill that vision in my life. And I know it's difficult because, as a young person, the question that you're probably going to ask yourself is, what is my purpose in life? What am I supposed to do? I don't think you can, just wake up one day and realize, this is your purpose. I think that the approach that works for me is to try a lot of things, to try things that you are curious about, that you think you'll be good at, and to not be afraid to switch and to call it quits on something that's not quite working, to pursue something else. Because I think the more you get those experiences, the better understanding you'll have about what are you good at, what is it that other people find valuable about you. Maybe it's a certain skill set that you didn't consider to be important, that's just natural to you, that other people are like, wow, yeah, I really like the way you do this. And, we've never had someone that can, maybe it's communicate with other people, or lead with empathy, or do like project management or time management or something like that. Obviously, there's other examples. But I think, that whole idea of, like, your work fulfilling you, I think, like, you ultimately need to fulfill yourself, and work can be a vehicle to do that. And I think for me, I think of my work as service to other people. Most people think of service as like, maybe it's community work, maybe it's nonprofit. But I think even in business, and in the technology industry, what you're doing ultimately is affecting people's lives. And so if you can tie it back to those people and say, like, hey, even though I'm working with code and working with media in my case as well, ultimately we're about helping people. And if you can think about that, then that ultimately gives you, at least for me, a sense of fulfillment, and the fact that, like, I'm actually doing something that's worthwhile in life, which I think is a feeling we all want to have.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm so glad you painted that generational distinction that I think is true in so many cultures and contexts, but the specificity of what that meant to be born right after apartheid ended for you in South Africa, I think is key to saying that there was a different option beyond survival, like you said, in terms of what work and meaning might come from careers. And the fact that you are able to articulate the tech industry as being a place of service, as being a place of helping people, in some ways that might seem obvious, but I also think sometimes we limit our definitions of what sort of work helps people.
Yeah,
we think
that's
of
definitely
teachers, nurses, people who are doing like a direct services, in-person interaction with someone. We think, oh, that's a helper profession, a counselor, a therapist, someone like, oh, they're in it to help people, a social worker. But I'm so glad you're expanding the definition that, hey, all of the fields surrounding technology that are constantly evolving and growing, those can also be framed as contributing to services, as helping people. I mean, I think it's, it sounds obvious when we say it out loud, but I just don't think our language often gives credit in that way.
Yeah, I think the tech industry has a bad rep in a way that, there are, and with anything in life, there are people with good aims and there are unfortunate consequences that happen. And there are people with bad aims trying to, use the tools of technology for bad ends. But I think that in my case, I think about technology as a means of solving a problem at scale and using leverage. So let me give you an example. Right now, I have a podcast and a newsletter that I send out every week, and I interview guests and I put it out on the internet, on YouTube for free, and all the podcast applications for people to listen whenever they want to. Going back 20 years, 30 years, my grandfather was a teacher in South Africa, and he was a wonderful teacher, but he could only do his work confined to the people that lived in his town and to the kids that were in his classroom. Whereas for me, I have the audience of the whole world. So I have people who listen to my podcasts that are from India, that are from the USA, from South Africa. We take this for granted today, but never before could we have done that. Like my grandfather would have had to catch many flights and basically try and like find people who wanted to learn the stuff that he was teaching. He used to teach English and languages and stuff. But I think when you reframe it like that, and when you see that, this is a means of ultimately you're trying to help people, you're trying to solve problems, and technology can be a tool in doing that. And I think we're starting to see that more and more as more businesses come online, turn to social media to say, okay, we need to try and meet people where they are. But yeah, I just think that like once I reframe that, as you mentioned, tech is not just this thing that's trying to get people to click on things and trying to get things to follow you online. That's kind of an unfortunate consequence of things being taken to the nth degree, where we don't necessarily have enough education about ethics and regulation and stuff like that. But I do think technology can be a force for good, and I'm trying to do that with my own life.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. So in our study, we also heard that a lot of young people, they have expectations or hopes about how their boss or manager might interact with them. But they want that the person who supervises them shows that they actually care about them as a person, not just someone who's producing something as an employee. Have you experienced that, or do you have any expectations around that?
Totally. I think this is something that I realized in the past few years. So a bit about my career journey. I had worked at some companies while I was in college, but my first real job in the real world after I graduated college was starting my own company, and some friends and I did a startup straight after college. And so I hadn't really experienced like what is it like to have a boss for a prolonged period of time until my current company that I'm at right now. And I think I kind of got very lucky where my current boss that I have right now, he is someone that is super experienced in the industry that I'm in. And he's actually the one that suggested that I take on the role that I have right now, which is called a developer advocate. It's something I'd never heard of before. And I think that the thing that makes him really great, and I'm really grateful to be working under him, is that he really gives you a lot of autonomy and freedom to take responsibility for things. He doesn't micromanage. But also another thing that's important is that he's very mindful of giving positive praise and positive feedback. I think in today's society, feedback is a word that's become synonymous with negativity. When someone says, I'd like to give you feedback on something, it's like, this is what you did wrong. This was incorrect. That was incorrect. And I think, in society, you're constantly being bombarded with, you're not good enough. You're not doing this well enough. You're not rich enough. You're not, doing this thing enough. If you can focus on a culture that highlights what people do well and focuses on their strengths and tells them that, hey, you are capable, you are able of contribution, you do this thing well, and you should actually focus more, and here's how you can get better at it. That's actually a much better environment. It's an environment of excellence, of emphasis of mastery, than an environment of fear where you're worried about like, oh, my boss is going to be angry at me and I didn't do this thing on time. I think that there's a phrase that one of the greatest football managers of all time, Sir Alex Ferguson, one of his players said about him is that he said that I never feared the manager, but I feared disappointing him. Is that you have this relationship of respect. And I feel like that's what I have with my boss right now, where I have such an admiration for him, and I feel like I've set high expectations for myself that I don't want to disappoint him. It's not that I care about him being angry at me not doing work, but it's about losing that status in his mind, I guess, of someone who's dependable, who's reliable, who can actually do the job that's in front of him. So I think that working at a place where that how you contribute to the company's vision and success, where that your contribution matters, that's something extremely important. And it sounds soft to say like, oh, you need to be told like when you're doing a good job, but it really is important. I think like my whole philosophy about this is that if you focus on your strengths, that's ultimately how you're going to become world-class at something. For example, like a basketball team or a soccer team, they don't try and play the same way that other teams do because they have different players. So you got to look at your players' strengths and say, okay, how can we actually make the most of what we have here? You don't berate your player who's tall to say, hey, you should be able to do things that short people can do. Right. Or, you got to work with what you have. And so I think that focusing on your strengths and cultivating that culture of positive feedback, of praising excellence is so important. And my personal philosophy is like, highlight your failures and your shortcomings to an extent that it saves you from them being fatal to you. So if you have like a fatal weakness, shore it up to the point where it's like, it's okay, but don't try and like become really good at that. Rather focus on your own strengths. And I feel like my boss has done that through the places where he's praised me and given me positive feedback. That has helped me develop my own self-awareness about like, what is it that I can actually go deeper on and become more proficient on. I think especially early in your career, when you're like 21 to 25 or something like that, finding that confidence in yourself. Because a lot of people today, they don't really know they don't feel like they can actually make a contribution in the world. They're like, I'm 18, I don't know anything. What can I actually do? And so I think building up that confidence through being competent at things is important. And then that positive feedback kind of points you and directs you to where you can go deeper and become better at.
Oh man, it sounds like you've got a lot of positive feedback. I'm going to already call it positive feedback there, because I think you're right. Sometimes feedback does get characterized as negative. From this current supervisor, it sounds like he was even able to identify some of your strengths for you to be in the current role you're in. Because you said at the onset of that response that you didn't even know maybe that role existed. And so he's attuned enough into what you bring to the table to make recommendations that help you achieve more, because it sounds like he really has an eye on your work. He's in touch with what you're producing and offering, and able to speak indirectly. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to say a nice word just for a nice word, but it sounds like it's particular enough to what you're actually doing that the feedback is so helpful and so applicable. So kudos to him. I love hearing these examples we've had from other guests as well, who've had really meaningful bosses and managers who I think lay out a lot of helpful principles for anyone listening in terms of how they might also come alongside a young employee and offer a lot of constructive feedback to support them as a new hire or as a new part of the team or division.
I was just going to say, and I think that for folks who are listening who might be like, I don't have a good boss, so I don't have a team that does this kind of thing.
Right.
I think that one of the principles for leadership that I have is to always lead by example, to always be the person who takes the first move in terms of starting to praise people, starting to, and not doing it in like a fake way, but doing it in a context that where it's applicable. You'll be surprised at how that spreads through a team. And how other people start doing it, and how you become actually, more, you feel better about like the place that you're working at because you're focusing on the positive things that people are doing. So yeah, just wanted to mention that.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I'm curious what you're going to say about work-life balance, because you've alluded to it a little bit. And something that we've covered in other episodes is that there's a prevailing assumption that work-life balance is for older employees, that young people like yourself, you're 25, you're, a few years out of undergrad, you've already had a few different workplace settings, but you still have enough
energy. Yeah.
Let's say energy, because I can't remember that phrase right now. You have enough energy to just make work your life. Especially in tech. I know that's an industry where people sometimes put in all sorts of hours around the clock. How do you respond to that sort of assumption of that work-life balance isn't for young people? And do you think workplaces have a responsibility to help foster a sense of work-life balance for all employees?
Yeah. So I think this is, again, a very important question, because there's a tendency for people to create the identity out of things, and work is becoming sort of the centerpiece of a lot of people's identity. Oh, I'm a software engineer. I work in Silicon Valley. I work in investment banking, or whatever it is. And so I think that, as someone who's experienced what it's like for work to literally take up 24/7, all of my life as a startup founder, just to give a sense of how life was for me after college, we worked 7 days a week. We would always be working on the company, and we didn't really take vacations or days off or anything like that. It was constantly, okay, we're trying to get this thing off the ground. And I think having experienced like the extreme of that, I'm much more disciplined about like how much of myself I'm putting into something, and being and knowing that like at the end of the day, it's about doing the work that has the most leverage, and finding, the other thing is that there's always going to be more things to do. You're never going to work so hard and then get to a state where you're like, I've done all the things on the to-do list are done, all the customers' requirements have been fulfilled. It's a constant cycle of growth and innovation. There's new things to be done. And so I think you have to build rest into that. One of the principles that I have for my own life is that of stress and recovery. That it's kind of like a wave where, in order to have these high peaks where you have peak output and you're doing good work, you need to have these troughs as well, where you're recovering, where you're detached from your work. You can't just be on all the time, because then that you don't get to touch those peaks of quality. You just get burned out, and your brain gets fried. And it's a common phenomenon where, people a few years in their career, I saw this a lot at my university that I went to, Princeton, where you have all these smart kids from all over the world. They come to Princeton, they're basically, jamming the gas pedal, trying to move faster. And sometimes you got to stop at a gas station and take a break and, make sure that your eyes are okay, rather than just trying to drive and get to your destination.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that you choose the game that you want to play. And so I think work-life balance, ultimately, it's a personal question. You have to decide what it means to you. So for example, for me, I value spending time with family, mainly because I'm away from my family. They're back home in South Africa. I live in the States. And so I feel like not being in a job that doesn't allow me to see my family like ever would be like a red flag. And I think that, like, back to the idea that you choose a game you want to play, you need to be aware of this game. Like, if you play the game of, working really hard and trying to climb the corporate ladder or something like that, just be aware that that's what you're doing. Don't do it as a substitute for finding, again, we talked about purpose and meaning. Don't do that as a substitute for finding purpose and meaning, and then starting to think that, oh, when I become a partner, when I become a senior leader or something like that, then I'll feel happy and then I'll have time to do all the stuff. I think a lot of people do that unconsciously. And even myself as a startup founder, I was under these illusions that, when we raise this next round of funding, when we get this number of customers, then things will start to get better and then we can, take some time off or something like that. It doesn't really happen like that. And so I think that, deciding your values and deciding what's important to you as a young person is something I would encourage everyone to do. And then trying to live according to that. And I know some people's work situations are more flexible or less flexible than others. But I think the more that you can live life according to your values and knowing that, you can spend time with your family and spend time on things that you value is that ultimately makes for a good life. And again, I think remote work has unlocked a lot of this for people where they don't have to commute to work anymore. They can spend time maybe getting their kids out of bed in the morning, maybe spending more time with them, maybe just going for a walk in the middle of the day or going to the gym and having time to exercise, whereas previously they didn't have time to do all those things. And so I think the more you can be flexible about like how you get your work done. And again, remote work is big here. I can potentially go and work from South Africa for a month and see my family and then come back. And that allows me to, fulfill both of those things. So I think it's about like, again, outlining your values and seeing like, what is it that makes a good life for me and trying to like maximize as much of them. And you can also negotiate some of this with your boss. Like if you work at a place that doesn't, have like remote work or something like that, you can try and say like, hey, is it okay if I just work from home like one day a week or something like that? I also think that expectations of work-life balance is important. So for example, like at our company, knowing like when you're messaging someone, like there's no obligation to respond straight away or something like that, knowing that there's people on the other side of the world who are like sleeping right now when you're messaging them, and not like, setting a culture where it's like, oh, this instant I message you, you need to respond. So it comes back to workplace culture as well. And yeah, so I would say that's like, there's a lot to talk about there, but yeah, on work-life balance, I think it's all about values and trying to live according to them.
That's really helpful to have you frame the realities of the pandemic as offering more work-life balance, because sometimes in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, when you work and live in the same space all the time, sometimes it's hard to have work-life balance. Trevor Noah, just to throw in another cool South African in New York, he had a good joke at one point that I saw go viral, where he opened his laptop and was like, here I am at work, then closed his laptop and was like, here I am at home, and just like moved to another piece of technology all on the same couch. And so it's not so easy to have those deviations in the last year between work and life. There's been such a confluence of, they're one and the same often, and the boundaries and the borders have been blurred. But I think you're right to also say, in some ways, like where my mind often goes, oh, it's harder to have work-life balance now. And you're saying, but wait, what if someone doesn't have to spend an extra hour in their commute each way? Like the fact that you said they could maybe spend more time with their kids in the morning than maybe they were leaving before their kids were up before. There's a lot of different ways of looking at how this season has afforded new perspectives on work-life balance. So I appreciate you illuminating those, and that it's a personal value field as well. In terms of those specific values that young people look for and hold in the workplace, we did a report in 2020 called Meaning Making, 8 values. Nice. Yeah, it explores 8 different values that the youngest generations now are really looking to find in the organizations that they might join and looking to embody themselves. So yeah, that values framing, if someone wants, besides our work-life book, going into these conversations of meaning around careers, we also kind of have a 1.0 version of that that I want to reference to listeners right now if they want other ways of looking at what values are young people looking for in organizations, including workplaces. So nice. I appreciate your language there. So, okay, we already said that people in tech and in other industries as well often spend really insane hours at work or doing work. And that's for all different age groups. It's not just young people. It's not just old people. So with all of the time we're spending in front of screens, doing work, we want to make sure we're also talking about meaning in life as a whole. So you gave us a little bit of a sense of some of your passions and hobbies in terms of Manchester United as your chosen soccer team, that your own podcast and newsletter that you put out is another passion and hobby. I'm curious what other projects or activities or communities provide that sense of meaning to you beyond work.
Totally. So in terms of like what I do outside work, it might look like work to other people where it's like, running a podcast and newsletter, there's still like logistical things that need to be sorted out, but I really like it. So I run my weekly newsletter and my podcast and blog. And it really just gives me an outlet for my own curiosity. It's a place where at work, I'm expressing myself and writing about technology and writing about like databases and basically helping people solve problems in a very narrow set of areas. Whereas in my podcast and newsletter, I can develop a much broader sense of basically explore a much more broader set of topics. And I don't have to feel like I'm being pigeonholed into just being one thing, because then, that's you might not. I feel like as humans, we're so multifaceted that like by suppressing like a part of yourself, that's just going to like, you're going to end up being unhappy and like stressed out and stuff. So I think having those outlets is very important. I also think the podcast is good for me to like meet people and talk to them, and sit down and talk about like things that you might not necessarily get a chance to do. So for example, like the format of my podcast is we talk for like 2 hours or so and explore like a wide range of topics. And it's difficult to do that with certain people. Like some of my mentors have come on, and you don't necessarily just get to sit down with them and pick their brain for 2 hours, whereas now that's an opportunity. Apart from that, I think exercise is very important to me. Health and fitness. I spend a lot of time like listening and educating myself on that. Also working out. I'm excited to be able to like return to a gym soon, but I've got like a makeshift home gym with like some kettlebells and a yoga mat and stuff.
Nice.
And then I think, as you mentioned, football. I love going outside to play in the park and also like watching it on TV and things like that. And then as best as I can, spending time with my family and friends. My family, unfortunately, is it's mostly calls on the weekends to just talk to them. And then friends as well. It's like catching up over text, over video call, or sometimes like meeting in the park, like socially distanced or something like that. Right now, at least over the past a year or so. And then in terms of communities, it's interesting because I think that like I am a fan of having a core group of friends or a core group of people that like you can talk to about certain things. So making sure that I'm keeping up with them and making sure that I'm not like letting those relationships die down or like not giving them the time and energy that they need. Because I think that like at the end of the day, like you want to try and have an outlet to meet new people and things like that, especially as a young person. In my case, like living in New York, like city synonymous with new beginnings and new friends and stuff like that. But I also think that a lot of the best friendships and relationships I've had with people who I know for a long time, we kind of know each other and we kind of have that space to explore topics and to talk very vulnerably and honestly about certain things. And so I try and make time to do that. For example, one of my friends is navigating like a career change. And so just making myself available to her to make sure that, she feels like she's supported and, I can give my 2 cents about, what I think is a good way to do things. So, just being there, I kind of think of those things as like just the responsibilities of being like an active citizen. If I was back home, I would try and do some things in the community. I also do, one thing that I almost forgot is mentorship of younger students. I don't really consider this like a hobby. I consider just like, I just like helping people. And there's people who reached out to me to help with like university applications, young folks that I'm helping navigate their career transitions and things like that. I think that like I've experienced a lot of goodwill from people who are later in their career who've helped me. And the more that I can do to pay it back, the better I think it's gonna be, you know, because there's certain tactical things that I picked up as well as like certain lessons that I've learned that might be useful to other people. And so I do that one-on-one. And then, you know, in avenues like this or through the podcast and things like that, I try to do that on scale where, you know, you don't have to know me personally to benefit from my life experiences and you know, use that in your own life.
Well, I love that you're trying to give back through mentorship of people younger than you. And you've already said that mentors are some of the guests you're having on your own podcast. So clearly you see value in the role of mentoring, formally and maybe informally. So I'm curious, when you've had to make career decisions, who do you turn to for guidance?
So for this one, I can give you an example of like a decision that I was trying to make, I guess, almost 2 years ago now. I was coming up on 2 years when I had to make the very difficult decision to leave the startup that I founded and had a large part in bringing into the world. And so at that point in my life, I realized that the direction that the startup was going wasn't aligned with my own interests, and it started to feel like work again. And I think, as a side note, if you ever at a startup and you start to lose like passion and excitement for what you're trying to do, you know, it's time to examine, you know, are you on the right track? So I think for me, it's a lot about following your own intuition and understanding that like only you know what's really best for you, and different people are going to give you inputs, but at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to decide, you know, what is the path that you go forward. I'm a big believer in the Bruce Lee philosophy of taking in feedback and advice, where Bruce Lee says, you know, explore many things, take in many different perspectives, absorb what is useful, discard what is not useful, but ultimately make it your own and find your own way at the end of the day. And so I think for me, I did have, when I was making that decision, a set of mentors. There were various advisors to our company. There's a close friend of mine that we are in the same industry, in the tech industry. And so talk to him about, you know, what I was feeling and what I think I could be doing. I think now I will definitely like consult my current boss and like certain coworkers that I have at the place that I'm at right now, just because we've developed that relationship where it's not just like, oh, you're a coworker, but I know you as a human being and I can go to you for advice. So for example, like next week, I'm actually talking to one of my coworkers about how she navigated her career and like how she thinks about like her own career progression, and see if there's any interesting ideas that I can take and apply to my own life. And the other thing, you know, like I'm a big believer in like going to people and like seeking help when you need it. So for example, when I was in college, I used the career services office at my university. Really, what is the word? I used it quite a lot, where I would have like every 2 weeks meeting with this person and like talking about what's going on as a means of like accountability and whatnot. In fact, one of my mentors played a huge role in actually bringing my first company into the world, where he kind of gave me the courage and conviction to understand that, hey, like you're not just working on like a side project here. This has bigger potential, and it gave me permission to kind of believe in myself. So on that sense, I'm very fortunate to have been exposed to those people. But I think that how I've encountered mentors in my life is just through luck. You just find people that vibe with you and you kind of build relationships with them, either people that you've worked with, or you can just reach out to people for advice. You know, I think depending on what stage you're on in your life, older people love to help younger people. And I think if you can formulate your ask in a way that it's very, you're not just asking them like, hey, help me figure out my life, but it's like, hey, this is the situation where I am. Here's what I'm considering. I'm curious what your perspective on this would be, given that, you know, you are doing X, Y, and Z in your life. I remember I sent a cold email to this mentor that I mentioned, who was helping with my startup when I was in college. And I was basically saying like, hey, you know, we both went to the same school previously were from the same area in the world. And I asked him, what his perspective was on a couple of questions. And they were very like targeted questions that he could say like, oh, think about it and be like, okay, this is what my answer would be. And so I think, again, the internet is wonderful for this, where now we can DM anyone on Twitter and Instagram and stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
You can like find people's email. There's websites for people that like allow you to contact them, where they'll have like a contact us form. Shoot your shot and like see who's gonna respond. Because at the end of the day, everyone is accessible. I think another thing about mentors is to know that like, as much as mentors are good for like tactical things in your life about like, okay, they might tell you, this is how I navigated the tech industry, or this is how I think you can talk to someone about getting a job in this industry or something like that. At the end of the day, everyone is kind of on the same level in a way where like when I was a startup founder, I was 22 at the time, I think. And I was trying to raise money from people much older than me, but at the end of the day, we're on the same level where it's like I could have been 30 and the power dynamic would have been the same. And so realizing that like, we're all like just trying to do the best that we can. No one has like figured it out. And, using other people as resources to say like, okay, let me try and see if there's any insight that I can gain from them into my decision, but knowing that at the end of the day, it's your job to actually make that decision and live your own life. I think one thing to be careful of is trying to look for people for advice to show you the path forward, because they're going to tell you like what they think is the time. And if you go and walk that path, you're basically allowing someone else to be the compass to guide your life. And I think for me, taking in different perspectives, but ultimately knowing that this is the direction that I'm going to go, and like taking ownership and having conviction of that is very important. So that's the role of mentorship for me. I think it might be different for other people, but that's how I think about it.
That's great. You gave a lot there. I want to highlight, though, that you took advantage of the career services office so frequently. For any young people listening, hear it from Avthar. It paid off to take advantage of that office at his university setting and to make himself really known there, even since you said you were such a repeat visitor. And you even highlighted that it built in accountability for you for the next steps that you needed to take for what was coming after graduation. So kudos to all those career advisors on college campuses. Your services are so instrumental. We want to know a little bit more about the theme of growth and personal growth specifically, because you've already painted a really compelling arc of your professional growth in the last few years. But how have you experienced personal growth? Is there a trusted adult who has helped you, in terms of goal setting or self-discovery, self-improvement, or particular communities that people or larger networks of people who've shown care and concern?
Yeah, this is another topic that I think is in vogue today, self-development, personal growth. The time in my life that was probably the most growth producing was also probably like the scariest, I guess, on paper. At the time, it didn't really feel like that. It felt very exciting. But when I was 17, as I mentioned, I grew up in South Africa. When I was 17, I got a scholarship to go to an international school. It was actually a group of international schools. The name of it is called United World College. The short name for it is UWC. And the one that I got a scholarship to go to was in Costa Rica. And so here I am it's a wonderful opportunity and I'm really grateful for it. But, here I was in South Africa. I didn't know anyone on this side of the world. I'd never been to this, like either the States or Costa Rica, Central America. And I went, not knowing any Spanish, not knowing the language, and went there to live and learn with. We had about 150 students from 70 countries or so. And I think that experience of being in a very difficult environment where not only was there high academic standards. Now I went to public school in South Africa, and so the standards at this school were a lot higher than the standards that we had in South Africa. We did like this international curriculum called the IB, International Baccalaureate. But I think just being on my own and being forced to develop independence and not having people that like ran after you and said like, do your homework. Not that my parents used to do that, but knowing that like, if you didn't want to do anything, no one is gonna like be mad at you or anything.
Okay.
Exactly. It's very different to like my teachers that I had back home in South Africa. And so I think like that opportunity to be independent really gave me the time and the setting to think about like what is important to me and pursue and construct my life according to those values and those interests. So for example, at that time, I took a huge interest in health and fitness. It's one of my major values that I have in life, being as healthy as I can. That allows me to be the best person that I can for my family, people at work, my future kids and stuff like that. Being around for the longest of time, taking care of health is very important. And so that is probably the most growth producing period of my life, but it was also the scariest and most things that could have gone wrong. I could have gone off the rails and, like struggled to fit into this new country. But I think taking up those challenges in life is very important. And again, having a purpose and a vision for yourself. I, from a young age in South Africa, I wanted to study abroad and I wanted to, basically when I was younger, I wanted to be a scientist. So I wanted to pursue excellence in science and engineering. And so that was my goal. And I was very dogged about trying to pursue that. And I think at that time in my life, it was good. I needed to be disciplined. I needed to focus on school and stuff like that. But now the goal isn't necessarily to get into a certain school or something like that, which was the goal back then. Now I think my goals and my growth is a lot about moving towards what is the most authentic version of myself and how can I develop my strengths in a way that it's going to be beneficial for other people. That's the kind of things that I'm trying to work on. And then also I think as I've worked in different industries, the value of things like kindness and empathy are extremely important. And I think for me, I am a person who I read a bunch of Eastern philosophy and that really resonates with me. And so I think the more kind and empathetic you can be, the more present you can be, ultimately you're going to be more productive and you can be more effective at work, but you're also just going to be a nicer person to be around and you're going to live a happier life. And so for me, that's what I'm trying to do. And the way that I'm pursuing that is ultimately through taking on different projects and through my work. There's a wonderful quote that I like. I can't remember the person who said it, but it basically says your career is just a vehicle that you choose to develop your character. And so to understand that, whatever you're doing, this process of tackling something is going to teach you about yourself. In every movie, any good movie, look at all the Disney movies, there's always something that happens to the main character that forces them to go through trials and tribulations, and they learn something and then become better for it. I think ultimately in life, we can take on, some of these trials and tribulations are forced upon us. For example, my parents lived in apartheid in South Africa. Like that's something they had no control over. Whereas now I have the privilege, I'm in a wonderful position where I can choose, hey, I'm going to start a podcast and a newsletter and try and share my lessons. Hey, I'm going to work at this company and, try and do my best there and trying to learn as much as I can. These are struggles that I'm voluntarily taking. And so to remember that, as much as you can try and challenge yourself and learn from the challenges that you have, that's how I think growth happens. Even in the body, like growth happens through stress. Like you don't gain muscle by just not lifting stuff. But when you have that stimulus, that's how, growth is produced. And then another thing on that, I think ultimately, as I mentioned before, you have to live your own life. And what that means is that no one is going to come and save you. This whole thing about personal growth is you are ultimately in charge of the life that you're trying to live. All the group stuff that you're going to do, if you join an accountability group or something, I think that's good. But any group that you join is going to try and suck you into their way of thinking about things. Whereas for me, I feel all self-improvement, all growth, all development happens on that individual level, where there are certain things that, from a group that for example, I joined a writing course last year, and there were certain things from the writing course that I liked, and other things that I was okay, I'm not really sure about this. I'm not really going to subscribe to, that philosophy or this practice or whatever. And so I think, I'm very much on the individual level, I try and make change within individuals. That's kind of the things that I value. Another thing that helps me with personal growth is I have the privilege, I guess, to have a career and like spiritual coach that I see once a month or so that really helps me to debug personal issues, things like, frustration about things, negative feelings about things. Just like someone who I can talk to, and it's not just about solving a tactical problem about like, something at work happened. Oh, maybe you should talk to this person. But it's more about like, how did that make you feel? How did you react to it? What did it tell you about, yourself, the kind of like deeper issues going on? Kind of like a therapist, but not really a therapist.
Yeah.
I don't know how to, like what the boundary is there. And then I also have friends who I talk to about these kinds of things on a regular basis. As I mentioned, going to these friends whenever issues happen in my life, career changes that I'm considering, talking to them to know that I'm going to get an honest answer and honest perspective from them. And then you mentioned like a trusted adult. One of the persons that has impacted my life the most was this gentleman who back in Costa Rica. His name is Rene Sandoval. He was basically like the house dad for my residents in Costa Rica. Okay. So there was about like 15 of us or so who lived in like different houses, kind of like a boarding house. And he was like the teacher that lived on campus and was in charge of us. Mm-hmm. And I think through just instilling responsibility and, we all had to do chores in the house and stuff like that. He actually gave me some good books and, always. So the books really like impacted my life. The book that really impacted my life the most was recommended by him. It's called Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And I think just like being around someone who always believed in you and who always like knew that like you are capable of being more than you are right now. Like, even if you're not in the best position right now, this is not going to be permanent, and you can overcome this and things can change for better or for worse. He really made a big impact on me. I didn't really realize at the time, but now that I'm looking back, he's someone who really helped, and I still keep in touch with him today.
Oh, that's great. You're still in touch. Yeah.
So yeah, that's one example of, how someone has helped with my own personal growth.
Oh man, you've given us so many solid examples, Avthar. I'm encouraged to hear that you have this spiritual coach. Was that the term you used?
Yeah, she's basically a spiritual coach. Yeah, that's we talk a lot about different things from Buddhism and Hinduism and just like general self-development and stuff like that could be applicable, but it's definitely focused on like the internal state and the feelings and the mind rather than, make a plan and follow step 1, 2, and 3. Right.
But I think that's fantastic. It's been very illuminating for me getting to participate in these podcast conversations this season, because a key theme I've noticed is that a lot of young people are pointing to a therapist, a spiritual coach in your case. A recent conversation I had on Jesse's episode, he talked about having a spiritual director, wow, which has its own particular shape, but it's really remarkable to me that a lot of young people are seeking out a specific person who will know them, who will be able to offer particular insights into their life and journey, and that it often comes from a different tradition. So the fact that yours focuses on a lot of Eastern philosophy, like you said, I think is so cool that you've been able to really nurture that connection and have that intentional monthly check-in to foster growth. And the fact that someone who was instrumental in your life as a 17-year-old, you're still connected to them as a 25-year-old with that educator / house dad from your high school program in Costa Rica. That's phenomenal. So much of our research indicates that the more trusted adults that a young person has, the lower their levels of loneliness, the lower their levels of isolation and depression. And it's case in point when we talk to people like you who are making so many exciting moves in life and in your passions and in your career, that you've had different guides along the way that are still, that you're still connected to. So adults who are listening, no matter your industry or your sector, know that the ways that you are trying to accompany and come alongside a young person, no matter what their current season or struggle or challenge may be, that is going to sow a lot of seeds that will have an impact far beyond the current season of where you're accompanying that young person. So that's really compelling examples, as has everything you've offered, Avthar. Is there any final thought you want to bring of anything you just wanted to expound upon or highlight from everything we're able to glean from this conversation today?
I think that one thing that I'd like to leave the listeners with, this is all about young people in the workplace. I just want to reiterate the point about, a lot of people are going to tell you as you try and think about what is the kind of work that you're best suited to and the work that is ideal for you. Focus on your strengths. That's where you'll create the most value and you'll do your best work by doing things that you have a natural inclination to and you have some sort of natural calling towards. That's how other people are going to, enjoy working with you the most. And also you're going to get the most benefit from that because you feel like you can actually be proficient at doing something and feel like you're progressing and have like mastery over something and have control over something. So that's what I'd leave people with. I think, there's so much negativity in society focusing on weaknesses where people are not good enough. Everyone's trying to sell you things to try and shore up your weaknesses. But I think just forget all of that and go all in on your strengths. That's how it's actually you're going to have, impact in the world, building a good career, building a good company. No one ever took a course and built a world-changing company or something. It's always the thing that's naturally within the person. Sure, you can, use resources like this podcast, like books to kind of guide you in different directions. But ultimately, everything you need to be a world-class performer or stellar in your career or just, live a fulfilling life, you already have within you. You're just trying to have to unlock it by going through your life journey. So that's the thing I would leave people with. Go all in on your strengths.
Love it. That is a great final word. Well, it has been a pleasure to talk with you. You have so many insights to offer to this conversation. You are a fantastic guest to have in this work-life series, and we wish you all the best in your ongoing service and help, since we're going to use that framework for technology. Your work in helping people solve problems through all different technology platforms as an entrepreneur as well. And maybe some listeners will listen to your podcast too. Thanks a bunch, Avthar.
Thank you so much for having me on. And thanks to everyone who's listening, wherever you are in the world. It's been a pleasure.
Solid. You're so good. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for engaging our research as it comes to life through someone like Avthar, but we also want it to come to life for you through this direct tip. So listen in. Here it is from Dr. Josh Packard.
One of the keys to getting the most out of yourself at work is to feel like your life is really flourishing. And young people were very clear in this report about work life that they felt like there was, like a one-to-one relationship between their life flourishing and their work flourishing, that these were no longer separate spheres like they might have once been for previous generations, but that there was increasingly an overlap in those things. And so finding identity or meaning and purpose in one place meant having it in another. So which I think this can be kind of a trick, especially for employers who maybe they came of age in a time when you did your work at work and you left it there, and then you went home and you had a non-work life, and the two were, sometimes they overlap, but largely separate. It's just increasingly not the case anymore. And so, a lot of the things that we might not think of as traditionally being associated as the job of the workplace, to help a young person find meaning and purpose there, increasingly is the job of the workplace. But critically, I think we've got some modern advantages to go along with that. And one of those is the way that we tie work into community. And I don't just mean the community at work, although that is important, but the chances for our work, for the organization that you work for, the job that you do, to impact communities in really meaningful ways that lead to that sense of purpose and become a part of a person's identity. So listen to what Rich said. Rich told us, if my work has purpose, I think that makes me a better professional and just a more hardworking person overall. And then larger than that, I think the work can have purpose outside of individual workers' lives. When work that is actively benefiting a community or communities, I think that's where real purpose can be derived. In the modern world, of course, we still have the opportunity for the organization that we work for to have a dramatic impact on the community where it is physically located. We can be an asset and be a benefit and be a resource to that community. But we also now have the opportunity, as Rich alludes to benefit communities, both real and imagined, sometimes virtual, communities of affinity, not just communities of location, communities of identity. So as employers, we might be thinking about that. How is it that we can make that tie-in between the work that somebody is doing and the organization that they're doing it for explicitly connected to communities across time and space, as well as local communities, so they can see the impact of the work they're doing, of the organization they work for, and begin to see themselves and their identities as productively, as flourishing when it's tied up with the identity of the organization.
Visit springtideresearch.org to hear more voices of young people and access our full study on young people's expectations and experiences of work, titled Work Life, Helping Gen Z Flourish and Find Balance. Sign up for our newsletter and be the first to learn about our upcoming research. Today's show was produced by Marta Abuaji and TJ Birnbaum, with original music by high school student Christian Unthank. Special thanks to our guest today and all the young people whose perspectives and insights make our research possible. Remember to find us on social media at We Are Springtide and learn more about our brand new Writer in Residence program at springtideresearch.org. Thanks for listening.